Hi there. Welcome to this week's episode of Waste 360's Unpacking Recycling with Charlotte. My name is Charlotte Dreisen, and I am so excited to be back with you all today for an episode on reducing waste after a couple of weeks off for Waste 360's phenomenal conference, Waste Expo, which was in Las Vegas. It was so much fun to talk with so many folks that watch the series every week in person. I can't tell you how phenomenal of an experience that was, but it is really great to be back with you all virtually this week. And really excited to dive into a topic which frankly is a little bit out of my comfort zone. Reducing waste and reducing material is a really tricky topic. It's something that, frankly, the solid waste industry is not really great at. It is not one of our strong suits. And likewise for consumers like you and me, in terms of the material that we buy, it is much easier for us to think about which bin we should put something in than to think about not using material and not buying an item or finding a way to avoid using a package in the first place. It's something that, as a whole, we in the US have not been really very good at. There are some isolated pockets where we have been able to do a meaningful job at reducing waste, but as a whole, as a country, we are chugging along, increasing waste over time, and have had very little success in recent years in tapering off and decreasing the amount of waste that we all produce per person or per household. There are so many different avenues we could go down when talking about reducing waste. So this first episode on the topic is going to be really high level, talking about a smattering of them, both the policies and laws that we've been able to use in some places to help drive waste reduction, as well as lightweighting and strategies we can use kind of, at a specific product level to reduce the amount of material we use, as well as some really innovative and exciting, return schemes and systems where we can reuse packaging in a thoughtful way within one business or among many businesses. I'm so excited to dive into them all. It's one of the most frequent questions that I've been getting, and frankly, one of the most welcome areas where folks have been able to enlighten me, since I am not a waste reduction expert by any means, but something that I'm trying to spend more time thinking about, both professionally as well as day to day in my own life. So to zoom back first and think about the amount of material that we've been generating over time. Back in the 1960s, that was when we really started collecting robust data at a national level. We generated about 88 million tons of municipal solid waste, of trash, recycling, compost, all of the above. And at that time, we had about 180 million people in the United States. Since then, our population has grown to 330 million, just about, an increase of 83%. And believe it or not, our amount of municipal solid waste and trash and you name it has increased way higher. So while our population has increased 83%, the amount of material that we're all producing has increased 240%, way higher than the rate of population growth, meaning that we're all consuming a lot more than we used to. And while that's tapered off a little bit in recent years, it's barely tapered off. And unfortunately, there are very few parts of the country that have been able to really make meaningful progress. There are some super exciting examples, but we've not yet really been able to tackle this in a super meaningful way as a country. So today we generate about 300 million tons of municipal solid waste, and the amount of material that we're generating today has definitely changed over time. So some kinds of material in particular we've had reductions for, which has been really exciting, but they've been compensated by equal, if not greater, gains in other kinds of materials. So one example of that, for instance, is paper. Since 2000, we've had a reduction of paper by about 23%. Less newsprint, less office paper, but correspondingly an increase in some materials like cardboard due to all of the e-commerce and shipments that we all have coming onto our doorstep every day. But with that overall decrease in paper of about 23%, we've been able to do a much better job recycling the paper that we are generating, luckily. So we had a 42% recycling rate for paper back in 2000. We now have a 68% recycling rate today. But we have not, unfortunately, been as successful recycling all materials. So we've actually had a drop of a couple percentage points. Between today and 2015, we've actually had a drop of a couple percentage points in our overall recycling rate. So in 2015, we used to recycle 34.7% of the material we generated. We now, unfortunately, recycle 31% and change. So we've been losing a little bit of ground. However, the overall amount of material we're recycling and composting has increased. Since 2000, we've had an increase of about 30% of the amount of material we're recycling in total, even though percentage-wise it's dropped, and we've had an increase of about 56% for composting, generally driven by yard waste. which is really helpful to keep in mind because when we think about reducing waste, we're not going to be able to reduce all kinds of waste with the same strategies. We're going to need different tactics to address each kind. For instance, we generate about 10 million tons of yard waste a year. Now, yard waste isn't really something that we need to necessarily be managing as a formal part of the waste management system in most cases. For your average, lawn that you're mowing at home, you don't have to collect those yard clippings. You can grass cycle, what we call grass cycling, and simply not collect them, leave them on your lawn to generate and contribute moisture and nutrients to your lawn. You don't have to bag them and put them outside for your community to pick up. Not a problem if it's going to a composting program, but for instance, in somewhere like DC, we don't have a yard waste ban on yard waste going to landfill. So unfortunately today, a lot of yard waste and lawn clippings do still unfortunately get collected and go to waste to energy or landfill. Another material category like food waste, we're going to deal with in a totally different way. We have to manage all food waste, but 1/3 of food waste we know can't be edible, has to be managed through composting or anaerobic digestion, something like your avocado pit or your banana peel. We're really not going to be able to divert that and direct that higher up the waste hierarchy to be reused and eaten and saved and recovered for edible purposes. We have huge amounts of food insecurity in the US and globally. A lot of wasted food, about 2/3 of what we waste in the US, can be directed towards those uses. And we've seen that work really well in certain communities. In California, for instance, they've been able to allocate $25 million for rescuing wasted food that can still be eaten and recovered. About 76 cities have used 20 of those $25 million to start food rescue programs and have been able to divert 86 million meals that would otherwise go to compost or landfill or waste to energy. Of course, we don't want that food. We want that food least of all to go to landfill and generate methane. If it was to go to compost, it would be generating soil and restoring, a lot of the soil loss that we have in the West Coast among elsewhere in the country. But the highest and best use of that material will be feeding humans, especially those who are food insecure. So phenomenal progress in reducing the amount of food waste in certain states and communities that have been actively prioritizing that and funding that. But we have been able to see a lot of strategies and requirements and laws come into place to help reduce waste across the board. One of the best instances we've seen this work is with pay-as-you-throw programs, or as they're sometimes called, save-as-you-throw programs. And these are programs where folks, households, businesses, you name it, can be charged based on the amount of trash and recycling they produce to incentivize them to generate less. A lot of times the trash will be pegged at a higher rate than the recycling or composting, and recycling and composting will cost less or be free. This incentivizes you to divert more and to generate less of both where you can. And there's about 7,000 cities and towns in the United States that have adopted pay-as-you-throw or save-as-you-throw models. And typically you'll be charged based on the amount of bags, the number of bags that you set out for collection, or the size of your bin, depending on the program. This has also been used in a lot of other places in North America and Europe and elsewhere to great success, and has been demonstrated to be one of the only ways that we can really reduce waste meaningfully. Massachusetts has a lot of the programs in the US that use save-as-you-throw or pay-as-you-throw models, and in their communities, for instance, that use pay-as-you-throw, they've seen on average, your average household generating about 1,240 pounds per year of wasted material, of municipal solid waste. And for communities not in pay-as-you-throw programs, they generate a lot more. They generate about 1,750 pounds of waste every year. That's a really substantial increase of about 30%. So, depending, it varies community by community. There's a wealth of data about how well pay-as-you-throw works. And it's one of the also really important pieces of that to pull that out as a specific line item. So in somewhere like Washington, D.C., where I am, for instance, folks pay for trash and recycling out of the general tax fund. They don't pay for trash and recycling as a special individual service. So not only do pay-as-you-throw systems help people be incentivized to generate less, but they also make them cognizant about what trash and recycling costs, because trash and recycling is not cheap. And certainly when it comes to recycling and composting, they generally cost a lot more than trash management. So those are two strategies that are really effective. We've also been seeing a proliferation of laws and regulations come into place that require material to be asked for at point of purchase instead of automatically given. In Washington, D.C., for instance, January of this year, we had a law come into place where folks have to specifically request utensils, chopsticks, condiment cups, and items like that when they get food service to-go orders, whether at a restaurant or ordering online or ordering through an app. They have to proactively, specifically ask for those materials. A restaurant can't just give them whether they like it or not, which is a really phenomenal way to reduce waste here and there. Obviously, utensils don't make up an enormous part of our waste stream, but it absolutely is a piece of the puzzle in reducing the overall waste that we generate. Some other really exciting examples of that are New York City's efforts to explore having a ban or requirement for folks to have to ask for a receipt, not just have a store where they're making a purchase automatically print and give a receipt. You know, a lot of folks don't need one. They should have the option not to use one in the first place. It's been tough to see during COVID, in contrast, that there has been ground lost in terms of reusable bags. And that's one area where I think a lot of us have been doing a much better job over recent years of bringing reusable totes when we go to the grocery store or go to a retailer. And due to concern about COVID being spreadable on surfaces, a lot of communities either required that practice to stop, or retailers voluntarily, required single-use bags to be used again, to have the utmost level of care and prevention, which is definitely well intended, but has some damaging consequences and has been largely disproven now that we know how COVID spreads via air. So that's one area where I think we unfortunately have seen some ground lost too. But we have seen some really exciting models being developed about reusing and returning packaging. A lot of people, I know my grandparents talk about, the days they used to bring glass milk bottles back to be refilled. A lot of really exciting examples are popping up and have been evolving over recent years about revamping efforts like that to use packaging, bring it back to be professionally cleaned, and have it refilled for purchase again. One of the really exciting examples of this is with Just Salad, which is a New York City base. They now have shops in New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, among others, but a smattering of locations, especially dense in New York City, where they have two options for folks to participate in a reusable packaging model. They can either buy a bowl for a salad for $1 and bring it back time and again to be reused and get a free topping, a really great incentive for folks to participate when they do so, or by placing an online order, they can have a reusable bowl sent with that order, packaged in that order, and to have it be brought back and professionally cleaned and kind of the cycle repeated at the next time they're placing an order too. A couple really great examples there, and something that's being modeled in a lot of different food service and fast casual quick service concepts around the United States, which is really exciting. And unfortunately, one of the areas too that's been a little dulled during COVID, knowing that a lot of that fast casual market is purchased through people working in commercial office buildings. And of course, many of us being remote these days, some of that progress has slowed a little bit, but it's definitely been increasing as a whole over the past handful of years and decade, and a lot of interesting policies coming into place to better support those efforts. For instance, a grant program in Washington, D.C., where the Department of Energy and Environment is giving grants for companies that would like to do that, to be able to install commercial-grade dishwashers and some of the infrastructure needed to professionally clean reusable packaging. But we know that reusable packaging is something that has to be designed intentionally for that use. You can't just take my shampoo bottle, my Head & Shoulders shampoo bottle in my shower, and professionally clean it, use really hot temperatures and really hot water an infinite amount of times and expect it to work well. Inherently, the single-use packaging that we use today is designed for single use and to be hopefully easily recycled. And those are really different product requirements than something that is intended to be reused indefinitely or reused for many, many times. For instance, branding and the colorants that are used to explain on a product's label what the product is, and stuff like closures, is really only designed for a certain amount of time. If I have a 10-ounce shampoo bottle, the company making it knows that, that might be, let's just say, 50 doses of shampoo that I might use for a couple months, and the closure that they designed for that bottle is probably designed for, about that amount of time, not for 20 times 50 uses if it was refilled and reused, that many times more. So we know that for reusable packaging to really work, we need it to be intentionally designed for that purpose, which is really exciting to see in some of the recent efforts like the Rounds and Loop that have been designing specially fit-for-use reusable packaging in partnership with no shortage of massive brands and retailers, as well as local companies. in the United States. Loop in particular has been partnering with folks, ranging from Gerber and Nestle and Mars and Kroger and Burger King to develop both online ordering as well as brick and mortar opportunities for folks to use reusable packaging, either to place online orders, receive that in reusable packaging and have it picked back up at their next order to be professionally cleaned and sanitized and reused. And that, instead of something like your conventional, for a Haagen-Dazs product, for instance, instead of your conventional paper tub with polyethylene coating inside and outside, which isn't recyclable, keep in mind, something like an aluminum canister for that pint of ice cream, where it can be, really nuked with high temps and hot water to clean, will be the kind of pivot from a single-use option to a reusable option. And when we think about reusable packaging, those are really going to be more robust structures. So we need to think about a system where folks are incentivized to participate, and we know that package will be successfully used time and time and again. Because the carbon footprint of something like an aluminum container for a pint of ice cream will be a lot bigger than that single-use package, we really need to ensure that it's going to be used enough times for it to be, from an environmental footprint perspective, logical. So we also, want to be thinking about ensuring that the system holistically is something that can perpetuate a material being used, so we don't just have heavier, more robust packaging being used in a single-use fashion and disposed of, maintaining our current levels of waste and waste generation and waste use. But some examples like the Rounds and Loop have been really getting off the ground and starting to proliferate in communities across the country, not only big cities, but elsewhere. I am so curious if folks have had the opportunity to participate in some of the brick and mortar applications for Kroger in Portland and in Duane Reade's in New York City for Loop, as well as with Burger King in locations all across the world, not just in the United States, or in Philadelphia, New York, DC for the Rounds, and among others. It's been really phenomenal to see those start to proliferate, and I am really excited to participate myself. And not only do we want to think about, as a consumer, how we can reuse packaging and how we can use less packaging and be thoughtful about what we consume, but also help our institutions do the same. So not only are we generating a lot of single-use packaging at home, but also in places like the office, at school, and universities, at hospitals, which are really great opportunities to divert large amounts of packaging that would have otherwise been single-use to reusable alternatives. One great example of this is with school lunch trays. Most lunch trays are polystyrene in the United States, or at least were for a very long time. And over the past 10 years or so, there's been a humongous transition to reusable trays to reduce that material that would otherwise be generated in huge quantities every day. In one Indiana school district, for instance, they transitioned all of their high schools from expanded polystyrene foam lunch trays to reusable alternatives, and went from using 50 55-gallon trash bags a day to only 15 55-gallon trash bags a day, saving $1,800 a year in the amount of trash bags they were generating less alone. Forget the cost of the amount of trash that they were generating and needing to hire a hauler to come and pick up. And that's a great example of one of the big benefits that we should all be prioritizing when thinking about reducing material, reusing what we can, and of course diverting as much as possible for what we do generate, is that when we think about reducing material, we're also reducing the amount of cost that we're going to have for having a hauler come pick up our landfill waste and needing to build and construct new landfills and waste to energy facilities in the first place. So there's definitely some meaningful gains to the bottom line there that we should all be prioritizing and figuring out better ways to quantify, since it can be a really tricky thing to try and prove ahead of time and not just look back on with hindsight and see how well it worked. But I would love to know how you reduce your waste, how you aim to use less and be more thoughtful about what you consume, whether you use reusable packaging, whether it's a one-off reusable mug, or whether you participate in Loop or the Rounds or Just Salad or any number of the really exciting pilots that are out there. Please do let me know in the comments below this video, or on Twitter at @SharDryzen or Instagram at SharRecycles. I can't wait to find out.